Good morning, comrades. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, comrades, and welcome again to the 16th Alternative Mind in Indaba. Our theme this year is energy transition for who? And that's the critical question that we're asking. We have been discussing the energy transition over the past 3 years, and this year we're asking the critical question, who is this energy transition really for? My name is Daisy Mwinima. I will be co-moderating today, tomorrow, and the rest of the army with my colleague from Tax Justice Network Africa, Francis. We will run through a couple of announcements just as we start so we can get everybody to settle down. So if you're outside and you're hearing me, please just find your way through to the auditorium. Once the main auditorium is full, the volunteers will show you where next to be. But we still have a couple of seats in here, so please just come through as soon as you can. So like I said, I'll give you a couple of announcements, and then we'll have an opening prayer, and then the rest of the day will flow. So we have a few housekeeping announcements. The first one is on the program agenda. Please, the QR code is at the back of your ID, so please find time to run through it and just check through the agenda. We have interpretation, both French and Portuguese. For those that will be speaking throughout the session, kindly make sure you are speaking as slowly as possible so that the interpreters are able to pick you. The interpretation mics are downstairs. You can go through and pick one, but only before the session starts, during tea break or during lunch. And at the end of every day, you have to hand it back. For the purpose of securing the mics, you will need to leave collateral in form of your ID downstairs when you collect the mic. We have bathrooms located on all the floors. Then we also have Wi-Fi for the conference. The Wi-Fi is meeting at Doubletree by Hilton, and the password is EJN 2025. I think it's going to be beamed for you at some point, so you're able to see it. But the Wi-Fi is meeting at Doubletree by Hilton, and the password is EJN 2025, EJN in capital letters. The tea breaks and lunch will be served on the ground floor, down at the piazza, where you found the breakfast at in the morning. And then the idea labs or breakout sessions are located on the conference floor, just here where we are. The sessions will be displayed on the digital screens outside of the venues. I'll run you through them as well, just before we break up for lunch. If you are not able to go through to your first choice, we know people have pre-registered for these sessions, please pick up a second choice and be able to participate. And then we have a daily register that is being circulated currently in the room. It will be circulated for the next days to come as well. Please ensure that you sign in. And finally, the code of conduct is still available at the reception. You received one to your email as well yesterday. Please make sure that you sign it and hand it back to us. On that note, welcome once again, comrades. I would like to call upon Reverend Elias to give us an opening prayer as we start today.
Good morning. We think that all of us here belongs to one God. We are here as the sisters and the brothers. That way we can say, God is good.
All the time.
All the time.
God is good.
God is good.
All the time.
All the time.
God is good.
Let's pray. Senhor nosso Deus, nosso Pai, esta manhã damos-te graças porque o Senhor é tão amoroso para conosco. O Senhor nos chamou pelos nomes próprios para estarmos aqui. O Senhor nos acompanhou nas longas viagens e aqui chegamos. És-nos aqui. Pedimos, Senhor, a tua presença em nós. Pedimos a tua direção em nós, para que tudo que vai ser dirigido aqui traga glórias para ti, Senhor. Ser com todos nós, cuide-nos de todos os males que possam nos vir e pedimos sempre a tua direção. Senhor, controla as nossas línguas, controla as nossas palavras, para que não nos ofendamos, mas nos construamos. Saiamos daqui todos transformados pela tua glória. E para que, ao voltarmos às nossas casas, estejamos recheados do teu poder e possamos transformar também os nossos locais, as nossas comunidades, e que possam alcançar a paz que vem de ti. Oramos pelo nosso continente africano, o continente que o Senhor criou com tanto amor e nos deu tantas riquezas para que nós pudéssemos usufruir. Senhor nosso Deus, pedimos desculpas por não usarmos como devíamos usar. Também oramos, pedimos desculpas pelos nossos irmãos de outros continentes que vieram a pensar que vem nos ajudar, quando vem nos ajudar a tirar os recursos. Pedimos a ti, Senhor, para que toque os nossos corações e voltemos ao amor um para com o outro, e podemos nos ajudar um ao outro a crescer. Pedimos a tua presença, pedimos a tua ajuda, agora e todo sempre. Amém.
Amém.
Thank you, Reverend, for that prayer. All right, now that we're settled, I am going to run you through our agenda. This is an overview of the Army agenda. So those of you that were able to join us yesterday, we had a beautiful session at the Methodist Church that ran from 5 p.m. to about 9:30. There should be some reflections posted on the Army social media platforms. Please feel free to visit those platforms and engage with us on the social media. Both on Facebook, Twitter, but also you can visit the Army website. So today, we have already had the opening prayer. We are going to go into an opening ceremony where we'll have the host welcome address that will be given by Nanda, and then we will have a theological reflection. Then we'll have opening remarks and hear more about 16 years of the Army that will be shared by the Army chairperson. And then the lead drafters will take us through the communique drafting process, just so we understand what we are doing and how that process is going to look like. After that, we will have a session. So just to mention, all this is happening within the main auditorium. I think today all the way up to about lunch, we will be in the main auditorium, or the side rooms if that's where you are. We will have messages of solidarity from a couple of countries that were selected. We do have people that were selected from those countries, should be about 6 or 7. And then we'll go into the keynote address, which will be given by Advocate Kemeka. This will be done virtually, and he will be beamed. From there, at 11 hours to 11:30, we'll break for the morning tea. Just make sure you get back to your room on time, so that we're able to put time in on time. The venue for the tea break and lunch, like I said earlier, is at the piazza just downstairs. From 11:30 to 13 hours, we will have a panel discussion that will be tackling challenges, unlocking opportunities, and driving innovation in the energy transition. That will be led by the Natural Resource Governance Institute. After that, we'll have the group photo for the AMI 2025. So right from that session, we'll go and have the group photo before we start having our lunch. So from the group photo, we'll have lunch. And from lunch, we'll go directly into the Idea Lab. So you come back from lunch, you don't need to come back here, just find the Idea Lab that you signed up for, or the one that you want to attend now, and go straight to that room. Like I mentioned earlier, it will be projected on the screen outside, so you should be able to know without any problems. At 16 hours, we'll have a panel discussion again that will be defining priorities for the G20 and just ensure that we are discussing the people's demands for the energy transition outcomes. This will be led by DECO of Oxfam and Manla of EJN. And then we'll have concluding remarks and just reflections, and we should be able to close latest by 17. If we keep time and we come back from tea break on time. Tomorrow, which is day 3 of the AMI, early in the morning we'll have a reflection on what day 2 looks like and a quick overview of day 3. This will be done here in the main auditorium, and then we'll have an opening panel on whose future counts. That will be led by Justice South Africa through Gloria. And at 9:30, we'll have the People's Court. Francis will be hosting the People's Court for tomorrow. That will take us up to tea break at 9:15, which again we'll have at the piazza at 10:45. So from the tea break, we go straight again into the Idea Labs. This will be beamed again on the screen so that you know where you want to go. And from the Idea Labs, we'll go directly into lunch. And so yeah, so if you look at the program at the back of your chart, it says the break of the lunch at 12:15. That has been tweaked a little bit. So we'll do both Idea Labs concurrently. We'll have the first Idea Lab and then go into the next one, and then do lunch at 15:15. That work from the Idea Labs, we're coming straight back into the room to receive feedback on the communique that is being drafted. This will be led by the rapporteur. And at 15:30 to 17 hours tomorrow, we'll have a closing panel on transparency, financing, decision making, and self-determination in the era of the energy transition. This will be led by Publish What You Pay International. And finally, for day 4 starts at 9 o'clock. We'll have a closing ceremony. So we'll get messages of solidarity from a couple of countries again. And then we'll have the closing keynote address from Mr. Zito. And at 10 hours to 11 hours, we'll have the closing panel interview focusing on AMI pathways in order to spark change or catalyze the movement. And from there, we will have the morning tea break and then have the march past for people to go and hand over the communique. We should be back here by 13:30 to have lunch up to 14:30, and that should be the end of the AMI. So that's what our program looks like for now. I want to thank you again for showing up on time. And at this point in time, I would like to welcome Mandla to give us the welcome remark. Oh, just a moment. Sorry, Mandla. So For those of you that joined us at the church yesterday, you realize we had one additional thing on the agenda, which I think is very important for all of us. We are meeting so many people in one space, and it's important for us to continue to have safeguarding conversations, just to ensure that this is a safe space and everybody is as safe as they can be. So I'll call upon Tarasai to just briefly run us through a safeguarding talk under 2 minutes, and then Manda can come and give the welcoming address. Thanks.
Thank you, Program Director. Good morning, everyone. We have circulated the Army Code of Conduct as part of our registration. This is designed to ensure that we have a respectful, safe, and professional environment throughout the Army. The Code of Conduct applies to all Army participants, staff, volunteers, and it also applies during any meetings that you might have as part of the Army. In the code, we have expected behaviors that will ensure that we are all safe throughout the conference. We are expected to adhere and respect all the South African laws, treat one another with dignity. We are also expected to utilize IT in a responsible manner, refrain from any possession and use of weapons and ammunition. We are also expected to demonstrate transparency and accountability in all our financial transactions, prevent any association with terrorist activities, particularly through the avoidance of financing terrorism and related endeavors. We are also expected to do the following: engage in and not to engage in any form of discrimination against any individual. We are not expected to consume, sell, or possess any illegal narcotic drugs. We are also not expected to conduct any form of harassment, exploitation, or abuse, whether sexual or otherwise. We should also refrain from engaging in any sexual activities with individuals under the age of 18. Additionally, participants must not possess, purchase, sell, or distribute any pornographic material or visit establishments where children are exposed to sexually explicit content. As the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, we are also available to assist organizations that want to institutionalize issues of safeguarding within their programming. With this Army, we have also established a reporting mechanism should there be any breach of the Code of Conduct. We have a safeguarding email known as armysafeguarding@gmail.com, all in lowercase. We have also placed a complaint box just outside the conference room where you can note down and drop your issues there. We also have the focal persons in our midst who will be taking any verbal reports. I'll ask the focal persons to come up front so that people can also identify you. We have Kiara, yes, you can come up front. We also have Makule. Together with me, we will be receiving any verbal reports concerning the breach of the Code of Conduct. Thank you.
God is good.
All the time.
All the time.
God is good.
And then my favorite, Amanda.
Always.
Amanda.
Always.
Away to?
Amanda.
My name is Amanda. And I would just like to welcome you all to the 16th consecutive gathering of the great people we see here today.
This is our 16th year together, and this is a historic year for all sorts of reasons. I will show you some of the people who were here on day one, who are sitting among you today. You won't believe it. But for 16 years, we have been convening. We have been asking you to come and share your great ideas, and we welcome you. Honored guests, distinguished speakers, and members of parliament, who I'm going to mention by name because this is a historic moment. We have with us members of parliament from different parliaments across the continent. They come to us through one of our partners, the African Parliamentary Network on Illicit Financial Flows and Taxation. We have, of course, our very own Honorable Dr. Kanisile Litchfield Shabalala, who is the chair of Uplift, and she has brought her friends, the Honorable Dr. Hawanis, who is the deputy chair of Uplift and coordinator in Central Africa. We have the Honorable Nancy Abisas, the regional coordinator for East African, well, she's from Kenya anyway. All right, East African community is what I wanted to say. Honorable Josephine Rabo, regional coordinator for West Africa, who is from that great nation of Burkina Faso. Don't you want to hear more from her? Please give them a hand so far. Please. We have Honorable Senator Lorraine, the regional coordinator for, right, is this right? Southern Africa, from the great kingdom of Eswatini. Then from South Africa, we have the Honorable Lerato Ngobeni, from who's the chief whip of the Parliamentary Caucus of Action SA, and a member of Senate committees, Home Affairs, Basic Education, and Small Business and Development, and Honorable Vuyo Zungula, who is the Uplift South Africa chairperson and president of ATM. We also have Honorable Selepe from Mpumalanga, who is a committee member on minerals, resources, and petroleum. And we have Honorable Sifiso Oscar Sibambo and Honorable Sabelo Isaac Masinga and Honorable J.S. Malinga. Please give our parliamentarians a vote. We welcome you to this great gathering, and we hope you will keep order. I also want to welcome my faith leaders, my bosses. It's very important that they are here because this platform was created out of conversations coming out of the church. We recognized the need for a church, the voice of the church in such a great meeting. It is a revolutionary gathering, and we feel sometimes that our tempers get the better of us. So it's good to have the presence of the church to calm us down. So I have my leaders from the Fellowship of Christian Councils in Southern Africa and the general secretaries of the churches in the region. Welcome. I also think we have traditional leaders. We always have had our traditional leaders who accompany the communities that are affected in their different zones. I welcome you all. We also have, of course, your civil society representatives and leaders in their own rights. We have mining industry stakeholders who are going to join us. We have academics, and we have all our dedicated advocates for responsible resource governance. I welcome you all. But before we do that, we also want to recognize that we are in a very, very difficult period for us in South Africa. we had a situation unfolding in one of the disused mines where a mining company forgot to close their mine and probably forgot to pay the workers that used to work in that mine. When the mining company left and left that mine unattended, our brothers who had been also abandoned by this company and by other companies, we have more than 6,000 mines that have not closed properly in South Africa. So you can imagine that you have left these mines unattended and you have left the workers also unattended. And the workers still have their skills. They have no other means of earning livelihoods for their families. So they've gone into these disused mines. And our government, in its wisdom, tried to punish these people. And the end result was a tragedy that has not been seen here before. We so far know that 87 people lost their lives in a mine shaft because government took a decision to stop any food or supplies reaching these miners, and they perished. And it is a sad thing for us, especially after what happened in Marikana, where again the government showed its anger with organized mine workers by firing on them indiscriminately, and we lost 34 lives then. So I would like to ask you all to please stand, and we are going to observe 87 seconds of silence for our departed brothers from across the continent. May their souls rest in power. Thank you very much. So, friends, for me, it continues to be a great honor and privilege to stand in front of you and welcome you, and to recognize that there is still a need for us to meet in this way to discuss the very important issues of natural resource governance. It means for 16 years, we have not found the solutions that we want, and we need to keep coming together in this manner. We come together once again in pursuit of justice, transparency, and sustainable development in the extractive sector, to shine a light on the realities of extractive industries and their impact on our people, our environment, and our shared future. For more than a decade, or for 16 years to be precise, The alternative mining Indaba has served as a beacon of hope and a platform for dialogue. We emphasize the dialogue. We bring together the different parties that are fighting over these resources. We are custodians of these resources naturally, but we don't know where they are. And those that have better science than us come and tell us precisely where those resources are placed. But they move us, they displace us, they batter us, and they take away our rights. And we are here to sharpen the tools that are going to demand those rights back. So, in a world where resource extraction continues to shape economies, societies, and environments, our gathering remains crucial in advocating for policies and practices that prioritize people over profits, sustainability over short-term gains, and justice over exploitation. Our theme, energy transition for who, a critical question of our times, challenges us to critically examine the intersection of mining, human rights, environmental sustainability, and economic justice. In fact, I'd like you to stand up again, look to your neighbor, and ask them, is this energy transition for you? Because we haven't found out who this energy transition is. Please, just stand up, ask your neighbor. I wonder how many people own that about who owns this energy transition? Did you get clear answers? Because we have been trying for the last 3 years. We have been meeting here to ask that critical question, and it remains for us a challenge to focus even more sharply on the intersection of mining, human rights, environmental sustainability, and economic justice. As we talk among ourselves over the next few days, let us reaffirm our commitment to ethical mining practices, corporate accountability, and policies that ensure the wealth derived from our natural resources benefits all, not just a select few. We know that there are people, faceless people in faraway countries who have a much more intimate relationship with our resources than we do. We have no idea here in Africa where our minerals are. There are many geological surveys that have been carried out, but we are always bringing the consultants from the same countries to come and do our geological surveys because we don't have the skills to do that. And when we sell them to the same people, and then they know exactly where our minerals are, and they know which people to target for displacement. Anyway, this year we meet against the backdrop of urgent crises and the winds of political change that have swept. I don't know, in our region here, there's been a lot of changes through elections, including in this country. Last year, you came on the eve of an election in South Africa, which has delivered a government of national unity. Other countries know what a government of national unity is, but here it's taking an interesting turn. There have been other elections in neighboring countries. Some have been peaceful and have brought about peaceful change. Others are contested and have brought challenges. And of course, we noticed that far away in another continent, there is a return to power by another president whose shadow has fallen very heavily across our continent for whatever reason. We shiver and shudder when we think about this, the goings on in that continent. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, for us, we worry about the, as I said, the unfolding saga and tragedy in Stilfontein and similar mining affected communities across the region. There are a lot of disused mines. Perhaps it's an issue we need to revisit here in South Africa. The mining closures. Mines are supposed to be closed, and the area where that mining takes place is supposed to be rehabilitated and handed back to the community. But nothing like that has ever happened in South Africa. We have fires that have been burning underground for 60 years and more because mining companies fail to rehabilitate mining. People's livestock fall into these disused mines and so forth. And you can have an academic argument with the government who tell you that those are still functioning mines because the shares of those mines were sold to a smaller company which has failed to ensure safety of the community around. So we need to look at those critical areas. The collapse of mining operations in Stilfontein has not only left a scar on the landscape, but has also devastated livelihoods. Unemployment, water contamination, and deteriorating infrastructure are just some of the burdens that local residents around these disused mines continue to experience. Acid mine drainage continues to poison vital water sources, while abandoned shafts and toxic waste pose severe health risks. Families who once depended on the mining sector now struggle to make ends meet, while promises of rehabilitation and economic transformation remain unfulfilled. Friends, Stilfontein is not just a story of hardship. It is also a story of resilience. The people of Stilfontein and surrounding areas, like many mining communities across Africa, are not passive victims. They are fighters, demanding accountability, justice, and a fair share of the wealth extracted from their lands. Their struggle is a reminder that we cannot speak of economic growth without speaking of environmental justice. We cannot discuss resource wealth without addressing inequality. And we cannot push for mining investments without ensuring corporate accountability. To our partners, our sponsors and supporters, we want to thank you for the continued belief in us that you have exhibited over the last 16 years. It has not been easy putting this together. It never has been. But we thank you for your faith in us, and we thank you for continuing to support and make this gathering possible. Please give a hand for our supporters. And to the grassroots organizations and community representatives present here, you are the heart of this movement, and your courage continues to inspire change across the continent and beyond. Please give all the mining affected and impacted communities who are here with us a hearty hand for joining us. We say to you, we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. I encourage all of us to use this platform to share your knowledge, to build strategic alliances, and push for transformative change. Let us leave this 16th alternative mining Indaba with not just ideas, but actionable solutions that will drive responsible mining and equitable resource governance. I want to thank you once again, but as you heard, if you were there at the church yesterday, we were mothered. Our mother, Reverend Suzanne Matale, came back. I want to say our mother and also our chair, Eric, are the poster pictures of the army. Right from the first army, the first meeting we had after our faith leaders decided that we needed a space among the mining companies to discuss these issues of stewardship. We had our first gathering in February 2010 in Cape Town. We had no more than 40 people. We were afraid. We were meeting getting into a discourse that we were not familiar with. We were meeting against mining giants who were meeting across the road. We decided to pitch our tent right next to them and to challenge them. And they came to our room. We were really fearful. These guys heard about our meeting and came. They pretended to be interested in listening to what we were saying, but they were more interested in identifying the particular community members. Eric was one of them, and they wanted to know what they were saying so that they could follow up with it. And this remains the situation. There are not very many safe spaces for communities to talk freely about the challenges that they face. Mining companies are bullies. When they are negotiating or when they are supposed to be giving free, prior and informed, or obtaining free, prior and informed consent, they are using coercion instead. It's like the C there stands for coercion, because they buy our traditional leaders, they bribe them, they offer them jobs for the traditional leaders, buy them amazing cars and build houses for them and employ their relatives. But the rest of the communities suffer. They're displaced, they're kicked out of their traditional homes, they're put far away from the communities and families and spirituality that they would have built over decades and sometimes centuries, and they are put in new places. So we still need to find an answer to all those challenges, and we will continue to meet here to have an army space. Even if there are 3 of us in the future and we're meeting under a tree somewhere, we will still call it the alternative mining Indaba, because our aim is to find alternatives. When you talk about sustainable mining, it's an oxymoron. It doesn't exist, because when you mine, you are damaging the environment. So there's nothing sustainable about mining. But unfortunately, it has been going on for more than 2 centuries. There's nothing we can do to stop it, but there are ways in which we can make it profitable for us as communities that live there. Amanda, I will identify some people to you over the next few days who made this possible. The person who wrote the first concept note of the first army. The person, I saw my brother Xavier here, who used to stay up nights trying to write the declaration. What have the people been saying? What are our demands to the mining companies and to our governments? They are all here. So somebody said last night, there are people who grew up in the army. Imagine 16 years ago, how old were you? Some people grew up in the army, but some of us grew old in the army. So we are hoping that the next army will be hosted by the younger generation who have more energy and more ideas than we have. But we, the people from the archives, who will be there on the sidelines to support you. Amanda, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amanda. My name is Amanda. Thank you so much. I think you are all getting excited and it's beginning to stand up. Amanda! Thank you so much for opening so well on time and we can catch up. We apologize for cutting the beautiful song. I'll call upon Eric to give us the. I'll call upon Eric to give us the opening remarks. Eric, you're welcome. Please, you have 15 minutes. I'll try and show you when the time is up.
Thank you. Thank you, COVID's program director. Manda, delegates of the AMI, faith-based fraternity, social movement. I now know that there are MPs in the room, trade union representatives, community representatives from across the region, activists, scholars, and distinguished guests from different institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, as Magda said, I stand here on this podium, nostalgic because 16 years ago, we met in what looked like a cockpit or a small room downtown Cape Town. That is where it all began. I never imagined that a small meeting would multiply to this magnitude. The 2025 AMI is framed under the theme Energy Transition for Who? The critical question of our time. Jargon is used to explain the big shift from carbon to renewables, but little of this question asks about the consequences of the transition. The theme will provide for robust exchange in the 3 days. As a critical safe space, the AMI is expected to offer catalyzing tool of trade to the communities faced with unmitigated resource plunder threatening their livelihood. We are charged with the difficult task of providing alternative solutions and building counterpower where necessary. The AMI is the pinnacle of African mining community solidarity in action, a protest action demanding real mineral transformation. 16 years back, I came from home called Luka, a village in the northwest province of South Africa under the Royal Bafokeng administration. A community that has long endured negative impacts of platinum mining in Rustenburg. I had difficulty explaining how the Royal Bafokeng model of community corporatization is unworkable with an institutionalized marginalization of local community, undemocratic practices, and decision-making outsourced to small group of technocrats, or if you like, established elites. The model itself, it's Western, the disease it's supposed to cure. It further deepens inequality. At the risk of losing friends, I must say this, that proponents and hopefuls of the African mining vision want to convince me and my community that such discredited model forms the future of mineral realms benefit. By saying this, I'm in no way doubting the richness of AMV's contents. However, with my lived experience, I remain an unrepentant believer. I find comfort in Albert Camus' suggestion that rebellion is demand for clarity, an existential necessity. The contradiction within the AMV needs attention, especially if it has to be taken as a local or Pan-Africanist product. Ali Mazrui warns us that intellectual acculturation ought not to be confused with ideological conversion. Ladies and gentlemen, AMI is taking place under a divine context and circumstances. Thus, we meet here as a movement cognizant of the difficulties facing us in achieving the total transformation of the extractive industry on the African continent. There is an overwhelming consensus among academics, think tanks, and powerful global institutions on this agenda. Yet, we are constantly confronted with continued obfuscation, tinkering, and reforming of old models. At the same time, we are also proud as the AMI to celebrate the sustained momentum of having told the alternative story of extractive over the last 15 years. In these 16 years, we are yet to test the genuineness of the industry to transform and prioritize unconditionally benefits and resource control to those at the receiving end, which is still a pipe dream. All attempts to engage thus far have failed. Examples are too numerous to mention. But one example that stands out is the 10 years of engagement with the International Council on Mining and Metals, ICCMM, that came to naught. I will come to this point later on. We are also outraged by the deliberate murders of artisanal and small-scale miners across the continent at the hands of the state apparatus and mining companies. The recent activities in Stilfontein, Northwest Province, South Africa, where scores of artisanal miners perished as a result of the implementation of Operation Balankot, represent a dismal policy failure of government. Even more, this is an indictment on the ruling elites in this country and across Africa, and more so the SADC region, for paying lip service to the ideals of regional economic integration. The Stilfontein crisis is but a microcosm of how governments treat artisanal miners across the continent. It denies communities food benefits to their minerals, and this represents structural violence of this system. Many regimes unleash brutal force on artisanal miners and lynch them daily, justifying this as a crime-busting campaign. The crime here is for them to support their livelihood, whilst covering for kingpins. The current South African state's forgetfulness or amnesia of the historic institutionalized migrant labor system, which birthed the problem and is recreating itself years after a generation of miners, is puzzling and absurd. This system is now at the whim of criminal syndicates who are ahead of state intelligence, if not in collaboration. We have set sight to scenes of horror and injustice in recent times, the continued genocides carried out by the State of Israel in Palestine and Middle East, the failures of democracy and increasing conflicts that continue to displace over 40 million people on African continent, and the Mozambican's electoral theft, which threatened her stability. We cannot overemphasize our solidarity with all victims and those who continue to fight for their just cause in this situation. Industrial mining as a symbol of inequality has just allowed, and sometimes in collaboration with states, to commit more crimes for profit with impunity. Year in and year out, people are killed in avoidable situations involving mining, and significant profit is made without justice being served and compensation being paid. War on One's report, called A New Colonialism, reveals that, I quote, the continent of Africa is today facing a new colonial invasion, no less devastating in scale and impact than that which is suffered during the 19th century. As before, the new colonialism is driven by a determination to plunder the natural resources of Africa, especially its strategic energy and mineral resources. As many as 101 companies listed on London Stock Exchange has mineral operations in sub-Saharan Africa covering 37 countries. These companies are mainly British and control large amount of gas, copper, cobalt, silver, and other resources. These operations means that London Stock Exchange or listed stock companies now also control much of sub-Saharan land. The companies now control over $1 trillion worth of resources in Africa in just 5 commodities, which is oil, gold, diamonds, coal, and platinum. Yet, they're called to annul Africa's external debts, which stood at $644 billion in 2021, is met with deafening silence. A huge discrepancy. To witness this power, just look across the road. I guess Reverend yesterday talked about across the road, where they have set up. It shows that this company sits with immense power. They are convening and supported by at least 21 ministers from 17 African states, maybe even more. The political elites and capitalists, with a heavy media complements of over 80 media houses, with the belief to resolve the problem of mining. which often sustain their opulent life of these elites. The organizers of this get-together have tried to convince us that they prefer playing a complementary role to our convening. One fails to comprehend this complementarity when there is a clear, sharp contradiction to what is on offer. They are for future-proofing African mining today, and we are busy with the critical question of our times: energy transition for who? The decisions they are going to take include creating and designating what Naumetline and other Latin American activists refers to sacrifice zones, places where people are forcibly removed, water polluted, land seized, activists threatened and killed. All forms of environmental crimes are committed with impunity. All these realities have been our past and they are our present. We can predict that given the overwhelming data, that it will be our future. Instead of companies doing proper human rights and environmental due diligence according to international human rights standards, such as UN Guiding Principle of Business and Human Rights or OECD guidelines of multinational enterprises, they rely on certification schemes. The current crop of extractive industry are the real masters of illusions. They build around themselves a deceptive machinery, which is now a flourishing industry, which specializes in standards, audits, principle, and certification. All this is done to truthfully tell lies and control the narrative. The pressure to perform on the ESG obligations weighs very high on their agenda. Resources are deployed for large-scale corruption of civil society, diluting genuine calls for accountability. They create alternative civil society space and even disguised as communities, essentially eroding genuine voice of the community. Progressive civil society needs to call out the hypocrisy of those who subscribe to this corporate strategy. They deploy heavy resources on global bodies representing large mining companies and standard bodies, which include the International Council on Mining and Metals, ICMM, and the Initiatives for Responsible Mining Assurance, IRMA, to legitimize them. These bodies have gained significance and are integrated part of public relations system, which enables greenwashing. They claim independence while they are openly controlled by the industry. The extractive industry cooperative ecosystem is so interwoven and obstinate to undermine avenues for accountability like accepted international human rights standards and legislation. IRMA standards might be great in content, but our experience with Anglo Platinum in Palakwe and Sibanye Stillwater, Vonalcorp, Marikana, and ongoing audits points to inadequacies, that the implementation of audits is easily manipulated, falls short of independence, and move from flawed system with grievance mechanisms poorly functioning. According to Human Rights Watch, this form of corporate self-regulation should no longer be considered sufficient. So what then is left for those who are affected by this externality? Their book, This Changed Everything, now my friend suggests that if we are to think of the lasting remedy to all these global maladies created by current capitalist system, we must build a mass social movement. We can see and know where the current system is taking us if left unchecked. This is a conclusion which is also shared by one of the authors, Budiwa, who referred to the idea of social movement as a force for change. We should seize this moment to amplify our demand for change. Now to return, I know time now to return to the failures in engagement shortly I referred to earlier. It concerns the unceremonious withdrawal of abrupt termination of AMI-ICMM dialogue. One must say it was difficult to understand what the International Council on Minerals and Metals, ICMM's engagement with AMI achieved for the 10 years, if not only sitting across each other. There was never a dialogue. If anything, this was a manipulation of civil society. The strategy to lock the AMI up into unproductive and endless discussion, to give the impression that there is a relationship, thus easing the industry's conscience. Perhaps what we are left with is lessons for the AMI. The unceremonial withdrawal, after exploiting the kindness of civil society, ties very well with my characterization of deceptive machinery. They achieve getting us talking and using us as their intelligence feeder, expecting no accountability. It was a turning point when they woke from their slumber. Not that it was a genuine slumber. It was a conscious action from their side. After 10 years of engagement, unprovoked, they came to the realization in their own words, they said, based on those years of experience, we do not feel that the ICMM is the most appropriate partner to continue to cooperate, to coordinate engagement between industry and AMI in the manner we have done so in the past. This is primarily because the very real and serious issues that AMI members have brought to the table consistently in the last few years are very localized, down to a site and a community level. As a global body representing 24 large mining companies operating all around the world, it is not possible or appropriate for ICMM to engage on such local issues. Given this response, given this response, we should learn that the extractive industry remain hostile to spaces demanding accountability. In conclusion, I wish everyone a vibrant engagement over the next 3 days. Let us tell the world that we want what we want from transition and what the real transformation means for us. At the local level, regional level, continental level, AMI is a safe space. Let's defend the game. Thank you.
We'll go directly into the communique drafting process. Do we have Janet nearby?
There she is. Bom dia a todos. A luta! Ok. Eu continuo a ver que muitos dos que aqui estão não têm os headsets. E eu acredito que não é nada muito bom. I'm still seeing that most of us are not using those gadgets. You do understand? All of us. You do understand decent French. And then I will speak in Portuguese because I'm much more comfortable to speak in Portuguese. Okay? Excuse me? English. No, that's not democracy. That's not democracy. Democracy should be that we all here, sitting here, we should understand each other. We should be comfortable understanding, discussing issues in different languages as well. I've got mine because I don't understand French. So it's unfair for most of you guys not using this, not accepting minorities in this place, I believe. Okay, yeah, Manuel, it's time, but we need also to. Okay, I'm part of the team which will be drafting the report, final communique, and Dr. Janet is also here, which will show us the structure of the reports And what we are actually asking from everyone presenting or discussions in the Idea Lab is to hand over to us all your communications and submissions. So we'll be presented at every room, and we also be following every Idea Lab. So I would ask everyone to submit even in advance your communication so that we can easily start drafting the communique and the report. We will have members of the team in every place, and in time we shall ask them to raise so that anyone can know and submit their own presentations. All right. So I'm waiting for Dr. Janet to come over here and then show us and share with us the structure of this process. And once more, I will ask everyone, please go downstairs to collect this. All right. Okay. Maybe, is it coming? Yes. All right. No one wants to rush downstairs. Yeah, but they're doing that. I can't get you. Sorry. Maybe they might. Yeah, because some people are not handing it over. So yeah. Okay.
Good morning, comrades. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. All protocols are observed. So, as my colleague has already outlined, we'll be just responsible for making sure that we document, take note of all your inputs. We really value your input because we are all here to really air out our voices, and I'm sure it will be great to see at the end of the day the outcomes and the product of what we have worked on. So I was just waiting for the template. So I'm so super grateful to Advocate John Lynn and of course my colleague Comrade Nelson that we managed to put together a template so that which would guide us so that we have quite a homogeneous process of capturing the notes. So all we need from you colleagues is to ensure that after you make your presentations, you please kindly send them directly to us. And especially for the idea labs and the side events, because we wouldn't want at the end of the day to miss out all those that valuable information. So I was still waiting for the colleagues at the back to just pitch up. But also in your rooms, when you go for breakaway sessions, you'll find that there are some templates that will be on your table. So please make sure, I think the facilitators of the Idea Lab would respectively have to ensure that there is somebody who is scribing for that particular session, although we also deploy our own, assistant robot tools to them so that we just complement each other's efforts. So basically, the framework will be there in the room. Unfortunately, nothing has been pitched, but they can read over the break. We can all just have a look at how things are supposed to happen. It's just a summary of what is transpired in the particular Idea Lab, then followed by priority areas. What are the issues that your Idea Lab would really want to prioritize? And the key recommendations, and these are the ones that are going to constitute the key components of the declaration and the final report. Thank you so much.
They deserve a clap because they will be summarizing everything that we will be discussing. My name is Francis Cairo, and because I'm standing on the podium for the first time, I am with the Tax Justice Network Africa, co-moderating alongside my comrade Daisy. We want to interrupt briefly the flow of the session because our keynote speaker, advocate, is called Advocate Tembeka. And as I'm introducing him, I'm going to ask the technical team to allow him to come onto the screens and get his sound ready. Advocate has a commitment at 11:15, and we therefore do not want to miss him for this session. And we therefore request that we do everything else, the theological reflection, the messages of solidarity from the different communities after we have heard from Advocate. And I see, and now I can be able to say my senior learned friend is on the screen. Advocate Tembeka is well known to most people in the movement as an advocate who is a specialist. Also, he is an advocate of the High Court of South Africa. And he has specialized in public law, competition law, land law, customary law, and mining. He is a public intellectual and has had an interest in the history of dispossession and how it continues to shape the relationship between the formerly oppressed and their former oppressors. He has written several books, and as our keynote speaker, Advocate, please confirm if you can hear us.
Yes.
There are people who are also asking, because they wore their best suits and dresses today, whether you can see us.
Yeah. I can see you in particular, but I can't see those who are wearing their best dresses. And suits.
I'm a representation of what you will see in the room.
Yeah, that's good enough.
Yes, this is the kind of suit we are wearing. Welcome, and we'll hand it over to you. And we will also request you to spare a few minutes to get any questions or reflections from the room. Over to you, Advocate.
Thank you, comrades. I've heard that we address each other here as comrades, so I hope this will be acceptable. I've got a written text. I usually do that so that I don't go sideways, but I'm not going to follow it. But I'll take certain themes from the written text. I'll send the text to the organizers later today. The theme is just transition for who? So I want to really talk about the for who part in the theme of just transition. It's the for who. And I've organized my talk around really 4 topics. The first one is on inequality, trying to answer the for who. The second one is the possibilities of a judgment we've largely forgotten in South Africa, at least, called Agri SA, delivered in 2013. We are now on its 12th anniversary. Itself concerned with the MPRDA, which at the time it was promulgated in 2002, was meant to be radical legislation to reorganize the relationships within and between people living on the land and people mining on the land. So I'll look into that in my second theme. The third theme is I want to ask whether there is any possibility open on expropriation laws that have recently been adopted in South Africa. I thought I should use this opportunity because it's become topical, let me put it that way. Then the last part is just to try and speculate about the future and try and think about what are the sort of interventions that we, on the alternative of the mining Indaba should be thinking about. So I want to start then on this theme about inequality. And the nature of our inequality, at least in South Africa, is structural. The chairperson used this term, structural, and it's an excellent term. So we've got structural inequality, we have structural poverty, we have structural violence. And the violence itself, when we say what structural violence, it's really about the fact that in the structure of society or the structure of social institutions that currently control social and economic power are preventing people from accessing their basic needs. But the violence is because those needs can be met because the resources are available but inaccessible. That's really the violence is. There are many needs that cannot be met, but they are resources, but the resources are inaccessible. And this comes really from two theorists, Johann Galtung and Todd Landman. And so they make this very powerful example that if we were living 30 years ago and we wanted the internet to enable us to have this conversation where I can sit at home and discuss with you, but it was inaccessible. We would understand it because it would be a reflection of the times and the advancement in technology, right? But if we were doing it today, it would be violent to still be unable to access the mechanism of communication because the technology is available, but it is inaccessible. The inaccessibility is caused by the structure of society. So that's why it's a very powerful way of understanding society, this what we call the structuralist theory. Because what it does do is it forces us to look at governmental and non-governmental institutions that determine our access to resources and therefore constrain our ability to act independently. And this is not a theoretical exercise, what I have tried to do. Data available also points to this social stratification. I must refer only to the 2018 report of the World Bank, which has been confirmed in 2022. Right? And it's probably the most comprehensive study on inequality in South Africa, because it stretches a period of more than 2 decades, trying to see what has the promise of freedom of 1994 actually brought to the people that were promised that freedom. So that the figures are actually quite depressing. 76% of the South African population experience poverty as a sort of constant presence in their lives. Right? It's a constant presence in their lives. It is either they are deep in poverty or there's a risk that they could be in poverty. That's 76%. 30% can be defined as chronically poor. And those that are non-poor, so those that cannot be described as chronically poor, face the risk of slipping into the chronically poor category. So they just make it, you know. And these numbers were exacerbated. If you look at the 2022 report, these numbers were exacerbated during COVID. So even those people that had a wage, to have a wage, you were always 1 wage or 2 wages or at most 3 wages away from chronically poor. So And so we know what this means, what this is a consequence of, in other words, how the structure brought about. To recall, this was Sir John Rhodes, right? This idea of Sir John Rhodes of pushing Africans out of land into labor, right? And the basis for which he did that was to make them dependent, right? Make them dependent on the wage labor system. So that process has taken place over 200 years, right? Of displacing communities from land and then making them dependent on the wages. So the World Bank confirms the fact that you are either chronically poor or those who are not poor face the menacing risk of slipping back into poverty if the wage is taken away. So what we then therefore have, we have an astonishing figure of 76%, right, who are either poor or face the threat of becoming poor. So, but this analysis, you need to take it further and sort of break it down on race and gender. Africans are at the highest risk of becoming poor. In fact, this number I saw was also confirmed last week by Statistics SA when they were doing, and their focus is usually on income inequality. But there's something unique that has also happened with another study by the London School of Economics, which is looking at asset inequality and finds that income inequality and asset inequality overlap. So what this means is that first, Africans are at the highest risk of being asset poor and also income poor. And children in rural areas face the risk of remaining poor for lengthy periods of time. So it's race-based, but it's also geographic. So on the geographic side, what they found is that the 20 poorest local municipalities were in the Eastern Cape, in Limpopo, in KwaZulu-Natal. And then the 10 poorest were in the former homelands. Right? Now, for a mining conference, this is absolutely eye-opening because these were the areas that sent the greatest amount of labor into the cities. Right? They also found that it was gendered, poverty is gendered. So with the highest incidence among African women. They also investigated the idea of education and its linkage to poverty. You would have seen that last week, the Statistics SA published this report that also showed that there is inequality in education access as well. But the finding of the World Bank is interesting because what it found was that education on its own is not going to end poverty and inequality. And this is how they would have quoted them. It says, for the poor, the financial assets represent 36% of total assets, while among the rich, financial assets represent 75%. Similarly, poor households have a very small share of mortgage in total liabilities, about 7%. While for the rich, this share is close to 5%. Ownership of financial assets features prominently among the factors that influence wealth inequality. Right? And so what conclusion they reach here is that it is true that there is a link between education and poverty, but that link is a very tenuous one. The greatest determinant of whether you are poor or not is not your education, it is your assets. Right? It's really your asset. So what we have is we have a lot of educated Africans with many, many degrees. But the problem is that they are also asset poor and they are wage dependent. And so which means they themselves face the constant menace of slipping back into the poor category. And so what this actually means is that you've got to break, if you want to solve the crisis of inequality in South Africa. You have to focus, right, on the asset inequality. Got to break that stranglehold over assets that is predominantly white stranglehold. They also found that the future of the 76%, so that 76% is the poor, the chronically poor, and the non-poor that faces the risk of slipping into the poor and the chronically poor category. The future for them is also bleak, right? Why? It's because poverty and wealth transfer across generations. So what remember in the early days of neoliberalism in South Africa during this 1996 period when gear was the hot topic. Remember that the big promise of gear, right, and why South Africans were being asked to embrace it, was this idea of a trickle down, right? We will build the wealth, but it will trickle down to the poor and the disadvantaged. But the figures, the statistics show that actually wealth and poverty transfer across generations, they don't trickle down. The consequence is that at least a third of all children born to very poor parents will probably remain poor. Children of rich parents will probably become rich themselves. So in some, what this means is that wealth calcifies at the top, it stays at the top, and it doesn't automatically trickle down. And because wealth and poverty are racially skewed, right? You can see the connection. What this means that for a foreseeable future, what you will find at the top will be white men, and at the bottom of the economic ladder will be African women. So that calcification means continuation of white wealth and the persistence of black poverty. And the way of addressing that is the reorganization of asset ownership in a way that shifts the paradigm in favor of poor black South Africans. The World Bank aside, the 2022 reports by the Competition Commission have also come to the same conclusion. They have found high levels of concentration. And if you think about which economic sectors are these levels of concentration, we find that it's in agriculture, it is in mining, it is in healthcare, it is communications, it is financial services. So mining is one of those areas in which there is a high level of concentration. And every time you ask these people about these high levels of concentration, they say, oh, how else are we going to do it? Because for mining, you need scale. And scale, you need big money, big machines. But what that has done is that resulted in high levels of concentration. And the Competition Commission was also looking at a 30-year study when it did this in 2022, and then it found that mining was one of those areas where there was high concentration. But it was also interesting that they found that high concentration of mining in very, very, very few firms, like extremely few firms, coincides with another concentration of land ownership in very, very few families. So in 1994, the individual families that owned more than 70% of commercial agricultural land, it was something like 78,000 of them. That number has now shrunk to about 40,000. So fewer people owning even more. And the same thing that's happening in mining is consolidation. Consolidation is the name of the game. And they also investigated another myth that employment will come from small and medium enterprises. But what they found was that small and medium enterprises have very high rates of exit. So in fact, so on average 3 years that a small and medium enterprise enters and exits. So in summary, we inherited a highly concentrated economy, a racialized economy, a geographically stratified economy. We have not made significant progress. We have not made it competitive. We have not made it de-racialized. We've reformed the law, but the law itself has not been able to reform society. And so we've had a radical constitution with radical NPRTA, but the problems that those laws were designed to solve have persisted. And the outcomes of this are clear for everybody to see. I will take the notorious instance of Neil Froneman, the Chief Executive Officer of Sibanye, who, it was reported in 2021, had taken home 300 million rands, and in 2022, 189 million rands. The managing director of Netbank, 2022, 43 million rands, and in 2021, 53 million rands. Or take the dividends that were paid to the shareholders of Thungela, which is the offshoot of Anglo, focusing on coal. 14 billion rands in 2022 was paid to the shareholders. And they were also reported at the same time to have bought a coal mine in Australia for 4 billion rands. And instances of MTN and Vodacom, these stories are everywhere. All of them showing this point about a highly concentrated economy and growing levels of inequality. So these are clearly the winners, the Fronemans, the Thungelas, these are clearly the winners because we have an economy of clear winners and clear losers. So who are the losers? The numbers show that in the largest sector that has been hardest hit has been the mining sector, declining levels of employment and declining levels of wages and worsening conditions of employment. I think this entire story of so-called illegal mining has simply reflected, who the winners are. And so the standard of living for the many is going down. Many workers are losing their jobs. So the system works, but it works for some, and it does not work for many. But I argue that structuralism is simply a method of analysis. It shows us a society that's not designed by God, but it shows a society that where the choices have been made by us. Right? Now, what can we do about this? What can we do about this? I want to then move to my second topic. My second topic is to look at that judgment of Agri-SA. So what the government thought it could do to address this problem of inequality and the desertification of Africans, what it thought it could do was to take control, completely control the minerals in South Africa. So it passed a law in 2002 called the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act, MPRDA. And that act achieved something significant because it passed the custodianship of minerals from individuals to the state. And what it also did was then to decouple land ownership from mineral ownership. And even when it came to mineral ownership, it also decoupled that further ownership to exploitation or use. And ownership and exploitation then became under the custody and regulation by the state. And the idea behind all of this was that if the state is in control of these productive assets, it could redistribute them in an equitable way, right, in order to address the high concentrations that the Competition Commission found were still persisting in 2022. In other words, 20 years after the MPRTA became law, those inequalities that it was designed to solve were still persisting. So that was the framing of that act. The mineral rights holders or owners took it to court, and they complained that what this act did amounted to a full-scale expropriation, and they were entitled to compensation. But the judgments of the Constitutional Court provide, I would say, scope and opportunity for us, and we've forgotten about Agri-SA and what it actually found. There were 3 judgments, but only 2 of some consequence. So the first judgment was given by Justice Mukwan. First, the book explains that there is a difference between deprivation of property, which is permitted under Section 25(1) of the Constitution, and an expropriation of property, which is regulated by Section 25(3) of the Constitution. And he says that in a case of deprivation of property, the state does not necessarily become the owner of the property. In a case of an expropriation, the state becomes the owner of the property. But this distinction is important not for theoretical sake. It's important because it explains that the state is not required to compensate an owner whose property has been deprived, unless that property has vested for purposes of ownership in the state, in the hands of the state. But because the minerals simply fell under the custodianship of the state, there was no passage of ownership and therefore no entitlement to be compensated. So that opened a huge possibility to truly transform, right, the sector and truly empower the disempowered and truly bring back the people from the margins, right, into the center without the risk of what potentially could have bankrupted the South African tax base. There was another judgment, a minority judgment given by Judge Froneman, who agreed with the outcome by Justice Mokgwema, but for different reasons. His reasons bear a lot of resonance today. Because what he said for him, he did not see the distinction between expropriation and deprivation as being decisive in the case. Why? Because he said the real issue is whether or not those who lost their mineral rights, because under apartheid they linked ownership of land to the mineral, surface and underground, and the NPRDA to decouple. He said, I don't see that distinction as critical. For me, what is critical is whether or not, in this particular case, if we classify it as compensation, it would be justified, classify it as expropriation, it would be justified to pay compensation. And he cited German authorities, which have been confirmed in the European Court of Justice, that compensation does not always have to be paid in each and every case of expropriation. Where an expropriation is undertaken primarily to resolve a historical injustice, people have forgotten about this judgment. Where an expropriation is undertaken to resolve a historical injustice, and just like in the context of what the MPRDA sought to do, it may be justified not to pay any compensation. And he did so by reference to European authorities, which have been confirmed by the European Court of Human Rights and applied it in the South African context. Now that again opened another possibility, right, of truly reforming the sector. But what we have seen, right, despite the possibility opened by Agri-SA, what we have seen in practice, right, which is what the Competition Commission found when it did its analysis in 2022, is a further consolidation, right, a further stratification, a further empowerment of the empowered, a further creation of even more inequalities, right? So you have in South Africa this disjuncture, right? The disjuncture between the promise of the law as interpreted by the judges and the reality of the law as applied by the politicians and their bureaucrats. On the one side, the bureaucrats are constantly and always siding, right, with the interests of the mining elite. Interest of the mining elite. This is why, despite a revolutionary sounding law passed in 2002, affirmed and reaffirmed in 2013, in fact, the space, right, has become smaller and smaller. Right? The space for the marginalized, the people from the outside, has become smaller and smaller. In fact, something even more perverse is happening. Not only have Africans, right, the quote-unquote owners of the land, been deprived of the rights to minerals, they have also now been deprived of the rights to the land, right? Rights to the land itself. And further judgments that have been delivered both at the High Court level and at the Constitutional Court level, using different techniques, whether it is techniques derived from customary law or techniques derived from statute, such as Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights Act, IPIRA. Those efforts at the reclaiming of the autonomy of the owners of the land continuously get pushed aside, cast aside, and undermined by the combination of state actors, right, and the mining elite. There are many examples to cite out of this. The most notorious in the South African context is Kolobi, where the community has been fighting for its entitlement to say no. It's right to say no to mining. And the government has stopped its pretense. It's now clear that on whose side it is. It's clear that it has now taken the side of the mining companies against the people. Right? So we come back then to Agri-SA. What we have is, we have a permissive law, an ambitious law, a reformist law, a revolutionary law, which has been undermined by state action. Right? It concerns the theory of structuralism. I want to move on to my third topic. Is there anything to gain from expropriation without compensation? In many respects, expropriation without compensation in this context of mining is a bit of an anomaly, because most of the work has already been undertaken in Agri-SA in relation to minerals. So in reality, expropriation in the mining context will be in reference only to the land. But whose land will be the subject of expropriation? What we have seen is that the land-owning class, right, the banks, the insurance companies, the agricultural firms, the associations, have joined this clamor together with AfriForum, the Democratic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, and other political organizations to form this global right-wing voice that pretends to be worried about the abolition of the rule of law. And what in reality they have been concerned with is private property. It's private property. And in doing so, they have distorted the essence of South Africa's constitutional order, Section 25. And Section 25 was agreed upon, right? Its purpose, yes, was to protect private property, but it was to protect the private property rights of the dispossessed. Those are the rights that were vulnerable to arbitrary seizure under apartheid. And the decision that was taken was that these rights ought to be protected. But it also served a secondary purpose, right, which was to transform the unequal property relations. Right? But over time, we have allowed that section to be manipulated and to appear as if it is a provision whose primary function is the protection of private property at the expense of the public interest. So we, comrades, have to consider the supposed benefits of expropriation with a little bit of skepticism in the light of what I've said in topic 1 and topic 2, in the light of the realpolitik, in the light of the real economy. I want to then go to the last, because I still want to leave some 10 minutes for discussion. I want then to go to the last of my topics. For the last 3 years, the Department of Minerals and Energy, well, it's now the Department of Minerals, has been engaged in a process to amend the MPRDA. We don't know what the amendments will look like. But there are things that we should be demanding from that amendment process. One, the rights of communities to control mineral resources. There is a provision in the existing MPRDA that if a community lives on the land, but has a title deed on the land, it can apply. But why should it be limited to those communities with title deeds? Because most communities in South Africa do not have title deeds as a matter of history. Right? So expanding the base on which the communities would be entitled to apply for mining rights is crucial. And if it is not part and parcel of these amendments are just not worth the paper they are written on. 2, clear and enforceable environmental regulation. Comrades, I cannot stress this enough. The current regulation, as far as the damage that is caused to the environment, as far as the damage that is caused to water, to the air, to the soil, to the animals, has proven to be ineffective. Communities living next to mining activities are increasingly reporting levels of sicknesses that they have never experienced before. Their life expectancy is radically reducing. We are so accustomed to stories that appear on television where people open the taps and they smell water. That is because the environmental regulation into mining activities is ineffective. If this law that is being amended will not address the ineffectiveness of environmental regulation, it will not be worth the paper it is written on. Thirdly, communities have been demanding the right to say no. In other words, not just the right to be consulted, which is what the MPRDA guarantees, but the right to consent, which is not in the MPRDA, and it has to be derived from other sources, from customary law, from Ipilwa. But there is no reason why it should not be inscribed in the NPRDA. Remember, it is already inscribed in relation to persons that can produce title deeds. That level of discrimination should be addressed. So unless the statute makes it clear that communities are entitled to consent and to withhold their consent, it's a very not like the paper that it is written on. Finally, what we have witnessed over the last 30 years, both in the land context and in the mining context, is that we have had loss of rights of residents and ownership of land that have far exceeded the entire apartheid period. Right? More people have lost access to their homes in democracy than in the entire apartheid era. Unless these amendments will strengthen land rights of communities, then again, they will not be worth the paper they are written on. And here, colleagues, we must not be confused about where the threat comes from. The threat is not only the state, or for that matter, mining houses. The threat is also traditional leaders. And traditional leaders have been able to exploit the space that has been left legislatively, regulatory, and administratively in order to expand the scope of authority they have over communities. They've given themselves powers that they've never had during colonialism and apartheid, for new powers of land administration, which powers are often used together with mining houses against the communities in pursuit of the interests of mining houses. So again, if the legislation that has been amended does not address this power imbalance between communities and traditional authorities, we have to say no to it. What should we be doing, comrades? I am still in the case that is opposing Shell's attempt to explore for gas in Wonderland. I am still in the case that is opposing the Australians from exploiting titanium in Colombia. But these are not my cases. These cases belong to the communities. And I have learned over time that the involvement of lawyers can be debilitating when it's over. But it is nevertheless central and crucial to the struggle. So, comrades, we should be building robust communities. We should not be taking over their struggles, but we should be enabling them to pursue those struggles. That means protecting them when there is a risk of criminal charges. That means using the law to open the system up. That means campaigning with them. That means lobbying with them. But building robust communities that can resist, but robust communities that can take care of self-development. And this idea of self-development, communities, is a crucial idea because our communities have been taught to wait for development. They should wait for development. But their experiences have shown them that it is impossible to wait for development. The Minister Antashi, when he tried to force communities in places that colony, used the example of no house. If you say no, you are like inviting no house. But no house is acting against the communities when we've been told what the communities want. But our communities are so vulnerable. What they require us to do is not to replace them, but to strengthen them. It is to enable them to resist on their own. It is to enable them to embark upon self-development. So this law that is being designed, if it ultimately fails the test of self-reliance, self-determination, and self-reliance on these communities, then we should be resisting it. Thank you, comments. So it was a pleasure talking to you.
That is amazing. Wow, wow. That is amazing. I don't think there is any way we can be able to. I'm sure you've taken something. Like there's no way we can summarize every hook that we've had from advocates. I'll walk away with a few. That, and I dare say that this affects most of us in the room, is that people are well educated, but they're asset poor. And they are only one wage away, or 2 wages away, or 3 wages away from slipping back to poverty. If you look at your neighbor, they are probably very highly educated, very highly accomplished. But due to the structure inequality that we see, I think most of us, and also because of the systems we find ourselves in, we are at that point. I can see it in your faces. I can see it just by looking around. I'm saying this, also request for the mics, because I want to give only 2. I only have 1 hand from Hassan. I'm looking for the next hand. I can see 1 hand on that side, and that will be it. That is Dr. Kabemba. Yes, so we'll have Hassan and Dr. Kabemba. Do we have any lady who wants to come? Any lady? Any woman? Ah, I see you, Reverend. So we'll come to you.
Thanks, Comrade Advocate. I think in your great input, you did not discuss our beloved continent, which is going to be subject to major wars of invasion because of critical raw materials. And to help focus the question, I'd like to know whether we could start with having a more Southern African solidarity economy, because our histories are so intertwined. And under apartheid, we knew more what was happening in Namibia, Mozambique, and the frontline states than now. And this, the developments in the DRC that has seen spillage of humans inside their own country and into becoming car guards in Cape Town, has resulted in xenophobic attacks against Africans. And because the bigger picture is not there. So I really want you to try and focus on the continent, which I know you love very much.
Thank you, thank you. We have Dr. Kabemba. Do you have a mic near you? And then we'll hear from you, Reverend.
Advocate, thank you so much for a brilliant articulation. I want to push you to think in a comparative. South Africa gets its independence in 1994. Ghana gets its independence in 1957. The structural analysis that you've given us to respond to for who, using the South African example, is an interesting one. I just want to ask, how has the structural analysis evolved over time? Because this is a continent that gets independence from Ghana in 1958. But it seems what you described here reflects a number of countries that got independence before South Africa. What can we learn from this evolution, the analysis that is there a way to change the analysis for us to understand our realities and to provide correct solution to the problems? I raise that because it seems to me that we are stuck in finding solutions that respond to our problems. I always say, if the studies that you mentioned, the World Bank, many other studies have been done on the African continent, we should have resolved the problem. Now, what is it that we should be doing?
Thank you, Dr. Kabemba. We'll hear, please, the mic from Red here. I request brief. I know you have about 14 questions. Please make them brief.
Thank you very much, Honorable Director. My name is Masi Chawa Torrega from the beautiful mountain kingdom of Lesotho. I'm the General Secretary of the Christian Council of Lesotho. I have two short questions. One, in your beautiful presentation, you talked about the democracy. In your own perspective, can you say democracy is meant for us Africans or it's foreign? And then if we talk about South Africa having its democracy in 1994, we are now experiencing the death of 87 people in the mines. Can we say this is democracy? South Africa took a legal initiative to talk to some sense into Israel about the genocide in Gaza, but then we are seeing the genocide in South Africa. For us, the church, one life lost is way too many. What can you say about that? The second question is short. Towards the end of your presentation, you talked about not only the state is a threat to us, but also the traditional leaders. Where does this leave the church? Thank you.
Thank you. Advocate, we have several hands in the room, but we are trying to save on time and catch up on some few sessions we missed. So I'm going to request you to come in, and I know that as you address that, you can also give us your parting shot. Over to you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I think that it's a pity I'm not there with you, because I would have loved to be in the room, because what I was trying to do was to provide points of provocation for discussion, right? For us to reflect and then to think about what we can do together. So in that sense, I'm not checking out, but I'm trying to say that I don't see my role, right, as sort of providing the answer, that I see my role as simply one of the people in the room having the conversation. So it's in that context that you have to understand my reflections now, which I'm about to give, not providing the answer, but to simply provide another way of looking at it and just a contribution in a continuum of conversations. So I think to start with the first issue around Southern African solidarity, I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated by that idea. And you know why? Because of history. The history of mining in South Africa is linked to dispossession in the whole of Southern Africa. It's impossible to understand mining in South Africa unless you understand the labor that we got from Swaziland, the labor that we got from Zimbabwe, the labor from Lesotho, and the labor from Mozambique. Because the Europeans did not see us as distinct, although they separated the entrails for European exploitation in the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. The reality is that they didn't actually see these distinctions. In fact, if you look at the definition of the word native, actually included Damaras, who are not quote unquote South African by birth because they are from Namibia. So they always understood that all of us were one and the same. You know? And if you look at the approach of Cecil John Rose, Cecil John Rose thought of Cape to Cairo. So the reason I mention this is because there is already that solidarity from below. But in the actual mining compounds, when you go there, there is already that solidarity from below. And which is why my workers actually never understand this discussion about xenophobia, because from time immemorial, they have always worked together from the entire Southern Africa. So which means that it's about coordination, as in fact, I think you excellently put it. It's about naming that solidarity as a Southern African solidarity, and then perhaps introducing different layers into it, a professional layer, an NGO layer into it. Right. You are right in pointing out that I didn't discuss Africa. In part, it's because I do not consider myself knowledgeable enough about the rest of the continent. And I am a student of South Africa's experience with colonialism and apartheid, and its related experiences with economic exploitation through the migrant labor system. And so I think a lot of comrades in the room know a lot more about the rest of the continent than I do. I do think, though, that South Africa's experience is something to be studied and avoided by our brothers and sisters in the rest of the continent. So that's why it's my own reflection about my own limitations of study and interest. And if I had said wrong things about Nigeria or Ghana, I would have been very embarrassed for someone from one of those countries or someone who studied it. They don't have to come and to point me. But as I'm actually very confident about my story when it comes to South Africa. But I absolutely endorse the point about the Southern African Solidarity Network as a starting point. But I point out that at the mine worker level, that solidarity already exists, and it was forced upon them by the conditions of empire. Yes, I also agree that it's necessary to look at a comparative analysis, even if we use my theory of structure, because structure actually makes it easy to replicate, in different contexts. Now, the story of independence, has been a fascinating story because it's largely been a story of disappointment. And many Africans look back at independence with fondness, of course, because we had to get the Europeans out. We couldn't tolerate the Europeans in the continent. We had to remove them. But the other side of independence, which is freedom, as opposed to the removal of oppression, but the other side, which is freedom. Many of us look at that period with a bit of disappointment. South Africa is no example. No example. What freedom has been very good to white South Africans. But everywhere you go, there's a book that came about 3 years ago by Professor Donnelly from Stellenbosch University showing there are more billionaires now than are whites than ever under the apartheid system. More white billionaires now than under the apartheid system. So the removal, obviously, of sanctions, the liberalization of the economy, the deregulation of the stock exchange, all of those have enabled this emergence of a white billionaire class. And so, and when you look at what has happened to the position of Africans, and it's obviously true that there are a few. Look, me sitting here is itself an example, we could say, that some progress has been made. But by and large, Africans remain at the bottom of the economic ladder. This is the story everywhere in Africa. You have a super elite of the native population together with the former oppressor enjoying the spoils of the economy, and then you have a base which is either poor or extremely poor, or always under the risk of slipping back into the poverty. The question about democracy is a complicated one because democracy clearly is also for Africans, right? And one must always distinguish. There's a phrase I like, which is the full beneficence. Right? So often what the Europeans did, they said, look, if we have failed you, why should we listen to you? So if you look at democracy, not just as a method, because if you look at the substantive understanding of democracy, well, democracy you can see it as a method of electing of leaders, right? But that is a very impoverished way of understanding democracy. But if you understand democracy in a substantive way as inclusive of rights as well, freedom of speech being one of the most important ability for us to speak together and without any fear. I mean, I can talk in this conference. I don't have a fear that when I go outside I'll be locked out. That's very, very important. But that too is what in South Africa we call a democratic right. So if you understand democracy as both method and also as substance, is it for us? It's obviously for us as well. Now, the fact that 87 people were killed in so-called illegal mining activity is a regrettable incident. It is a scandalous indictment on the South African government. The response by our politicians has been disgraceful, utterly disgraceful, because some of them actually encouraged the fact that those people should not be taken out of the mine. And they forgot that we are where we are because of their own policies, right? So it's a scandal, it's a disgrace, but one needs to draw a distinction between the government and the people, right? It's the government that responded in such a disgraceful way. But a lot of South Africans have shown a lot of compassion, right? It's them who campaigned to go to court. It's them who campaigned for food and aid. It is them who supported. And by the way, these so-called illegal miners are not all for it, because that is also the trick that the South African government has been playing in our minds. It is to assume that every time we see a so-called Zamazama, they're foreign. They work in conjunction and in solidarity with South Africa. So I don't think that example itself is a stain on democracy. It is a stain on government conduct. Right? We can debate the issue of genocide. I think South Africa was right in calling out the genocide in Israel. I think South Africa is wrong in failing to deal with 87 deaths which were preventable. We had the power to prevent them, it didn't do that. And I think there's quite a long legal process that will still be pursued in this country. And it is currently being pursued for full accountability for those deaths. Whether those people came from Lesotho or whether they came from Zimbabwe, it doesn't matter. A human life is a human life is a human life. The church in this country exists with a large owner of the land, and sometimes it has structural power, and sometimes it can also be a constraint to the exercise of freedom, in the same way as the state, traditional leaders, mining companies. So, because it has institutional power, it's capable of exercising structural control. So, yes, it must be placed in critique. But the church can also be a transformative institution, right? The same way as traditional leadership, all of these institutions can be transformative institutions. It depends, it depends on the locus of power, depends on our ability to influence and shape change.
Sorry.
The last word, if you said I should
Can you hear me?
Partnership.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm requesting you wind up in the next few.
I've basically finished. I was just going to say that the last word is simply that we must remember this is not our struggle, it is the struggle of our communities. We learn our labor and our intellect, but it's their struggle. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much. And I think you can hear by the sound in the room that we appreciate taking time. We also appreciate the depth with which you have enabled us to reflect on this. We wish we had you in the room. We wish we had more time, but the conversation continues. We wish you all the power that you need to continue defending the communities out there. And thank you for being one of those leading advocates defending communities. Have a good day. Comrades, because I want to allow you to have some sugar into your system so that we can continue. I'm requesting that we take 10 minutes theological reflection, and then we will go out and take a break so that you can stretch, have some water, take some tea. So I want to welcome Reverend Wilfred. And I'm going to request you to do your reflection in 10 minutes. And I'll be a good timekeeper. Over to you.
I'll do exactly as you say, considering that when I was supposed to speak, you forgot about me. So I do accept the tag of being the marginalized. So it's so I'll comply. I bring greetings to the Army edition, the 16th edition of the Alternative Mining Indaba from the EJM board of Okisa. In the interest of time, I'm going to just give a theological reflection on the matters that are before us. A theological reflection is not a sermon, so I'm not going to read the Bible. It's a theological reflection is just a question of asking what God says about the conversations that we are having. And the theme of this edition of the Army is not a statement. That's what really excites me. Neither is it a declaration, but a question. Not a rhetorical question, but a real question. And I'm deeply enthused by this theme. Because often we have been trained not to ask questions, but to accept things as they are. And as the theologian, I'm reminded of a biblical narrative of the beheading of John the Baptist. When Herod's daughter danced to the amusement of the guests, the mother to the young girl who had danced requested that the girl request for John the Baptist's head in a plate. And the father instructed that John the Baptist must be killed, and his head being brought right into the party whilst it was in a platter. What really touches me about this story is that nobody dared to ask why was John's head in that plate. And the party continued, to my surprise. Nobody dared to stop the music. Yesterday, I was one of the few who were privileged to hold a candle in remembrance of our colleagues, our brothers and sisters who died in a mine, who were killed in a mine. And I remember John the Baptist. And when the director of ceremony asked us to lift up the the candles for a picture, I ask myself, am I not lifting up John the Baptist's head for a picture and without asking the question, why were those people killed? Why are we commemorating those people and not asking the question, why did the South African government did that? We are more often trained to observe minutes of silences and not ask the question, why? This edition of army who came to Cape Town in South Africa. We are here, the music is going on right behind us in the Parliament building where the sonar is going to be presented. And no one dares to ask, why are we lighting 87 candles? Why were those people killed? Why can't we stop the music and allow the party to stop until we get answers? So I hope that the question, energy transition for who, is not just a rhetoric question. It's a question that we are going to engage so that when we leave this place, we have answers to this question. Energy transition for who should not be just a question, friends. Let us allow ourselves, if need be, to stop the music so that the part can stop until we get the answers. The question of energy transition is not merely a technical or economic issue. It is a profoundly ethical and theological one. Whom does it serve? Energy transition for whom? Who stands to gain and who will bear the burden? This inquiry reaches beyond the technicalities of energy production and consumption. It delves into the very essence of justice, equity, and our shared humanity. In this reflection, I will explore the theological dimensions of energy transition, examining how our faith and values inform our understanding of who benefits from this shift and who is left behind. In many religious traditions, creation is seen as a divine gift entrusted to humanity with a mandate to steward and protect it. The book of Genesis 1:26-28, calls us to be caretakers of the earth, emphasizing the interdependency of all creation. And this stewardship goes beyond our environmental management. It requires a commitment to social justice, ensuring that all individuals and communities have access to the resources and opportunities needed for a dignified life. The energy transition is not merely about moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy. It encompasses broader social, economic, and political dimensions. Historically, marginalized communities, often those least responsible for climate change, have borne the brunt of environmental degradation, pollution, and resource extraction. As we shift towards sustainable energy, we must prioritize the voices of those who have been silenced and ensure that their needs are met. A just and equitable energy transition must encompass more than just a technological change. It must center human rights, transform power relationships, and decolonize development. And I emphasize the need to give the voices of those who have been silenced back to them. I often hear saying in forums like this, we are the voice of the voiceless. Says who? Whose voice did you take from, and what voice are you saying you are the voice of the voiceless? Everyone has got a voice. We need to sit in these forums and give back those people their voice so that they can speak for themselves. Actually, when we were all born, if you don't cry, you know what happens? They will do something to you so that you cry, so that they know that you've got a voice. So all of a sudden, some people start to think that they can speak on behalf of other people. No, let's give them their voices back and not speak on their behalf. Therefore, the need of having community voices in these platforms is very paramount. To the question, energy transition for who? From a theological point of view, I'm going to answer that question based on Matthew 25, verse 31 to 46, using the theological concept of preferential option for the poor, which is a concept that emphasizes concern for the marginalized, vulnerable, and those living in poverty, signifying a moral priority to address the needs of the poor and marginalized in society, essentially meaning that when making decisions, the needs of the poorest should be considered first and given greater weight than others. It is a call to actively advocate for and support those experiencing poverty, often rooted in the belief that Jesus Christ identified with the poor and marginalized. In the context of energy transition, this means prioritizing the needs and interests of the poor and vulnerable in the transition to a more sustainable and equitable energy system. Why preferential option for the poor is relevant in energy transition? Number one, energy inequality. The energy transition can exacerbate existing energy inequalities if not designed with the poor and vulnerable in mind. Energy poverty, lack of access to modern energy services, and energy insecurity can affect the poor and the marginalized. Vulnerability to climate change. Number two, the poor and vulnerable are often more vulnerable to the impact of climate change, such as extreme weather events, water scarcity, and heat stress, which are more closely linked to energy production and consumption. Number three, social justice. Preferential option for the poor requires that energy policies and programs prioritizes the needs and interests of the poor and the vulnerable, promoting a more just and equitable energy system. I'm going to just say a few principles on the preferential option for the poor in energy transition. Number one, participatory decision making. Engage with and involve the poor and vulnerable in decision making processes to ensure their needs and concerns are taken into account. Like I said before, give them their voice so that they can speak for themselves. Equitable access. Ensure that energy transition promotes equitable access to modern energy services, particularly for the poor and the vulnerable. Affordability. Design energy policies and programs that prioritize affordability and make energy services accessible to all regardless of income or social status. And support community-led initiatives that promote energy self-sufficiency, energy efficiency, renewable energy adoption, particularly in underserved communities. Lastly, social protection. Implement social protection programs that cushion the impact of energy transition, such as job losses, skill gaps, and changes in the energy prices. When I look at the word transition, I'm reminded of the transition that happened when the children of Israel were moving from Canaan to from Egypt to Canaan. When they were in the desert, God taught them how to manage transition when He fed them with manna. Obviously, coming from the Pharaoh economy, where people were being classified in accordance to what you have and what you don't have, the slave and the master. But on giving them manna, God says everyone will pick what is enough for you today. You don't have to pick more than what is enough for you. And those who had the skill, those who were taught by Pharaoh to move faster and pick more than others, they would find their loot rotted the next morning. And may God help us that in this transition, we appreciate and understand that God requires us all to have enough for ourselves and not having more than what we need. As I conclude, I'm reminded of what the Nigerian economist Aluko said. He said the poor cannot sleep because they are hungry, and the rich cannot sleep because the poor are awake. Let us not allow the rich to sleep whilst we are awake. Let the good Lord bless you.
Wow, wow. The poor are awake because they cannot sleep. Or because they are hungry. And then the rich are awake because the poor are awake. Wow, no better way. But I also like what Reverend has reminded us. It is not being, representing the voiceless. It's also about allowing everybody to speak out. Because upon birth, everybody found their voice for them to be alive. And if you don't have a voice, they will do something to you to make sure that you have a voice. Thank you. It would have been a disservice to miss that kind of reflection. And you have now, therefore, having been very patient and kind to us, you have now qualified for a cup of tea. You have also qualified for a glass of juice, for a health break, for stretching, and we come back a few minutes before 12, because at 12 we will be starting, and anybody who tries to sneak in after 12, we will have a special punishment dance for you to make sure that you keep time next time. So we come back a few minutes at 12 so that we start. Tea, as mentioned, is served on the ground floor. Enjoy your break.
Não há condição. A condição não é o suficiente para quem entende. Como? Para quem entende, estamos. Sim, mas estou surpreso que há muita gente, há muita gente assim. Eu vou ter que ir à frente. Ok, nós ficamos por enquanto e voltamos então até já para todos aqueles que nos acompanham a este momento. Temos a plena consciência de que a comunicação está sendo feita de uma forma nossa, da empresa, mas infelizmente as condições técnicas não nos permitiram ter a tradução para português. E creio que somente os que entendem a língua inglesa poderão dar valor aos conteúdos que estão aqui a serem partilhados nesta edição do Money Indaba
2025 na cidade de Cabo, Cape Town. Como disse, a sessão de abertura teve lugar ontem à noite, ou seja, ontem à tarde. Ela foi feita na Igreja Metodista Central, que fica no centro da cidade. E hoje aqui a sessão uma sessão com todos os delegados que estão tentando começar, terão 3 dias, no caso, começando a sessão de abertura foi ontem, segunda-feira, hoje, quarta-feira, já estão a ser as discussões dessa edição de 2025. Ontem, a sessão com religiosos, como bem disse, o evento foi feito na Igreja Central, Metodista Central, no centro de Cape Town. E hoje, aqui, nessa sala de conferência, aqui perto do Dom Bosch, onde está essa sala de conferência, está a ter lugar esta sessão de debates com delegados de forma central. Em todos os anos, no mês de fevereiro, há a sessão de Indaba, que é uma plataforma de discussão sobre as questões sobre a indústria extrativa, a mineração, e acontece sempre, de um lado, as conferências que reúnem as grandes empresas, assim como os governos, que reúnem-se num espaço separado a esse, e esta aqui é o alternativo, que reúne pessoas da sociedade civil, religiosos, pessoas interessadas, sobretudo a sociedade civil interessadas no assunto, para trazer os problemas que vivem nas suas comunidades e apelar com que toda esta discussões possam depois surtir recomendações para levar os seus respectivos lugares. No último dia, que será quinta-feira, o evento vai concluir com uma marcha de repúdio, que será feita de um perímetro a outro, no centro de Cape Town, onde então este grupo, eventualmente outros interessados, poderão juntar-se à marcha de repúdio, a qual nós, equipe de repórter, também vamos cobrir e mostrar tudo o que está a acontecer aqui. Temos uma delegação, digamos, grande, da sociedade civil angolana, e para além de Angola, os países que falam português também estão em Moçambique, e o restante dos países anglófonos, francófonos, como a África do Sul, que é o país anfitrião, temos o Eswatini, Tanzânia, soube que tem também delegados que vieram de outros continentes, que regularmente vêm discutir aqui em Cape Town sobre as políticas e a situação da migração em África. Eu faço um ponto e vírgula, como disse, estamos a fazer uma pausa e em breve voltamos para vos dar mais conteúdo de tudo que está a acontecer aqui nesta edição do Indaba 2025 na cidade de Cabo, Cape Town, África do Sul, e até já.